Alrighty, the fallout from the New College insurrection continues. I have been following very closely the perhaps somewhat incessantly, as far as some of you are concerned. Maybe you're tired of hearing about it, but I've been following very closely the events surrounding the regime change at the New College of Florida. And I've said in the past that I thought that this experiment would have major ramifications for public universities across the country, namely in red states that are controlled by Republican governors who have, like Desantis, the power to influence public universities and how they are governed. But already in the state of Florida, we are seeing the ramifications of this decisive action in other state universities, not just the very, very tiny New College of Florida, which Darren Beatty points out accounts for a mere, actually less than 700 of Florida's 340,000 college students. And by the way, that 340,000 number, I believe, is only public colleges and universities. That doesn't include private universities like the University of Miami or Stetson or what's another one, like University of Tampa. While it is exciting to think that there could be a Hillsdale of the South nestled in the heart of the state of Florida, the third largest state in America, it is still an absurdly small school. And so making even incremental progress with the major public universities, the ones with tens of thousands of students, on net will have a much greater impact than even converting the whole of New College into a fundamentally conservative institution. And so it looks as though Chris Rufo, board member of New College, appointed by Desantis, is not only going to be overseeing the operations at New College, but he's also investigating the practices of public universities across the state. And apparently every week he is going to be publishing some kind of expose about a different program at a different university. And this week, I hadn't talked about this yet because, it wasn't really newsworthy, but now it is. He was talking about a woke scholarship program at FSU, the Florida State University, our oldest public university, in which white students need not apply. It is a scholarship for students of color exclusively. And so Mr. Rufo correctly points out that this is an example of anti-white racism, and it is not something that the state should be sponsoring with its tax dollars at a, regardless, because I don't know how the scholarship is funded, so I don't want to be accused of misstating a fact if this might be a privately funded scholarship fund that is funneled through the university. It might have a private endowment. I don't know that. I would assume that's not the case, but that's possible, so I'm not going to say that. But at the very least, this is being funneled through a public institution, which constitutionally, we're told, is obligated to guarantee citizens equal protection under the law. And so I think it's safe to say excluding white folks from a program at a major public institution such as the Florida State University might be viewed appropriately as a violation of equal protection. And so, like the roaches that they are, the folks of Florida State ran and hid and completely scrubbed this whole program from their website, and apparently they're shutting it down, and they're not going to have this scholarship anymore for non-whites. I guess they'll be opening it up to white folks as well. And honestly, this is just one. I mean, in principle, this is no different than getting rid of affirmative action. This scholarship is a form of affirmative action. It is offering financial aid that is to be used exclusively by non-whites. Now, unlike most affirmative action programs, this one does not seem to penalize Asians. It seems to the wording of it on the website was, all all minority students. They didn't say minority students excluding Asians. So, but still, it's the same principle. It is still a form of affirmative action. And so if Rufo is this quickly taking on a rather small and inconsequential examples of affirmative action at Florida State and getting them to back down without much of a fight, frankly, he essentially canceled the anti-white racism of this program, through a sort of cancel culture, in a good way, expose. And in doing so, he showed that these people are not invincible, that you can stand up against them. And this gives me a lot of hope because, this is kind of like, it's kind of like a pot shot. It's not exactly the big fish or the big kahuna, whatever you want to call it. This is not ultimate victory. It's a small victory. But it's a proof of concept, and it shows to me that not only is New College going to just set an example for the rest of the country, they're going to, at least in Chris Rufo's case, they're going to be going on the offensive against the rest of the state university system and questioning and ridiculing those who follow the old backwards way of thinking. Now, Florida State currently is still run by an exclusively left-wing administration, but when you combine the analysis and the exposés that are forthcoming from Chris Rufo and perhaps other people, I don't see why Chris Rufo himself, would be the only person tasked with this. I would think that that Desantis can afford to put somebody on the case of trying to root out these woke programs and bring them to his attention. I mean, I would think that would be worth maybe a full-time position, just combing through all these university policies and, identifying the woke nonsense. After all, DeSantis did make a very strong commitment in his second inaugural address that Florida is where woke comes to die. This is how you make good on that. To me, when I heard that address, not that I listened to it live, but when I saw the headlines, I thought, okay, this nice lip service, but I didn't actually expect anything to come out of it like this. This is substantial, and I have a lot of hope for the future, as I think most of you have gathered by now. I haven't been hiding that. This alone has made me a bit of a fan of the governor, more so than I have been for the first 4 years he was in office. Because, as much as I rail against colleges and things, I do think that in a perfect world, the concept of a university is good. I do think that, research in general is something that human beings should engage in. I think it's sad that our society doesn't have effective research institutions that actually care about the truth. And so I've always thought, hey, if we can just, get away from these poison institutions, ignore them, defund them, maybe if we're lucky, abolish them, that's better than the alternative. It never occurred to me that we had a chance of recapturing these institutions. And so, essentially, I've been outflanked from the right by a sitting governor. That's something that I never thought would happen. And so, moving on from Florida State, the University of Florida today or yesterday, sometime this week, officially brought in Ben Sasse as president, which I think I've mentioned perhaps on this channel. And Ben Sasse, for those of you who have actually heard of him, which is, I would think, a minority, he is very much a non-entity. The last few years, he used to be someone who was very vocal. He was a big never Trumper. But, he was one of those kind of like the Ted Cruz or Mike Lee types who were like, I attack, Trump from the right. I think that, Trump is just, he's not conservative enough. But Ben Sasse, it's kind of like, I hesitate to call him full neocon, because he's not Bill Kristol. But I do think that he is more comfortable in a room full of Bill Kristols than he is comfortable in a room full of Donald Trump supporters. And so that doesn't give me much hope for him at the University of Florida. But when I compare Ben Sasse, possible neocon, certainly someone who is friendly to neocons, and I compare him to a purple-haired English professor whose pronouns are je. I say, you know what? This Ben Sasse guy, he's pretty reasonable. He's someone that we can work with. He's someone who we could implement changes through. So I don't think that Ben Sasse himself is going to be the impetus for change at an institution as entrenched in left-wing orthodoxy as the University of Florida. But I do think that he could be an effective conduit for change if it is piped in by the folks who are going to be rebuilding New College, primarily Chris Rufo, and if more radical people end up getting staffed around Ben Sasse, and if more at least somewhat conservative people. I'm not even asking for right wing. I'm not asking for all stars, AAA folks. I'm not saying that they need to get the best talent, but the standards in these universities is so low. The bar is set so low that even Ben Sasse, if he completely restocked the university with clones of himself, UF would become the best major university in the country, by far. So that's not to say that I think that neocon heritage types are great, but they are getting better. They are changing. The old 80s neocons are dying off, and even a place like Heritage, is starting to be, and I'm using them as an example, just because that's kind of, since there is no, real, since there is no platform for conservatives in academia, the closest thing that they have to any sort of intellectuals in Conservatism Inc., in their established order, not just people floating around in the ether with no institutional support. So let me be clear. I'm much more aligned with people who have no institutional support. I'll put it that way. But we're talking about building institutions. And so when you're talking about institutions and the right, Conservatism Inc. is it. It is the institution. And so if I think of things like on a gradient, if New College becomes a locus of true right-wing thought in America, that's great. But it's a small school that's only going to be able to directly touch a few students. UF, on the other hand, has tens of thousands of students. I don't know exactly how many. You know what? Let me Google that. Okay, just quick Google search, 52,000 as of 2017. I'm sure it's only gone up since then. That's insane. That's a lot of impressionable kids. And I have to say, a lot of kids that go to UF go there because, it's Gators football, because, my dad went to UF or whatever. It's just sort of the default thing. It's not like a place like New College or Berkeley or Evergreen in Oregon, I think, where Eric Weinstein used to, or Brett Weinstein. Yeah, I think it was Brett Weinstein used to teach at Evergreen. Those are schools that directly cater to the left. like openly, more openly than all the others. Like, that's their whole thing. Like, not that you are welcome as a conservative at UF, but like they do exist there. And so even if you just replace UF as it is currently configured and you just transplant Conservatism Inc. into that institution, and it's all a bunch of Ben Sasses that populate that school, which I don't think will be the case. I think that the way that Desantis is going, when the winds of change begin to blow, it's not going to be, the National Review crowd who is taking over these universities. I think it'll be better people. I'm excited to see how the other universities change, who ends up in charge of them. Because as far as, the big ones go, as far as the big public universities go, you still got Florida State and UCF, which are bigger than UF, who are completely still controlled by wokesters. There is no, new DeSantis insurgent president of either of those universities. And then there's USF, which is smaller, last I checked, than UF. We also have smaller state universities, which I've named before in the past. They are less consequential, but again, still important. Florida State, I think, is probably the most important institution to capture. It is also, right in the heart of Tallahassee. So the executive branch, I would think, has a bird's eye view of what's going on there. It's probably a little easier for them to manage. And I think it's also beneficial to have conservative institutions that control, in the heart of the capital city. I don't think it's healthy that in every state, the left controls the capital city, even in very deep red states. And so if Florida State, in the capital city, Florida State University, becomes a conservative institution and attracts those kinds of people to the capital, that's just going to pay dividends for a long time. It'll give the right at least something closer to a home field advantage. The citizenry in Leon County, I think, will still continue to vote Democrat. I mean, I'm not talking about importing a bunch of permanent residents there, but I'm saying put more people on the right in and around the capital, change the atmosphere. And then after that, I do think that for historical reasons, the next most important institution to tackle would be UF in Gainesville. And frankly, the only reason why Alachua is a blue county is because of the University of Florida. That's how powerful it is. I mean, you've got this university nestled in a very rural part of the heart of more northern Florida. I mean, it's pretty far up there. Obviously not as far north as Tallahassee. But, it's an institution that really feels out of place because it is surrounded by deep red culture for hours in any direction. I mean, it's kind of like, kind of reminds me of like West Berlin. It's just a thorn in the Soviet side because, you've got the German Democratic Republic, and then right in the smack dab in the middle of it, you have this western city, which just refused to die. And to be fair, I'm not saying that Gainesville needs to die. There's a lot of great people who live in Gainesville. I know people in Gainesville. It's not a bad place, but the left-wing culture has become toxic, just like it has everywhere. And so silly me if I think that the University of Florida should more accurately reflect the views of the people who live around it. It is people who work and study at the university who make that a blue county. Everything around Gainesville, the whole rest of the county, even, is deep red. It's kind of like a microcosm of of Illinois or something. Illinois, you think of it as, well, it's just a normal Midwestern state, but they've got this massive blue dot called Chicago that makes it a deep blue state. Outside of Chicago, Illinois, looks like a lot of the rest of the Midwest. It looks like Indiana. It looks like Iowa. And that's kind of how Alachua County is in Florida. In fact, Gainesville is not even the county seat. It's called Alachua County because the major population center was the city of Alachua when that county was formed. And when the university was founded in Gainesville, I imagine that was a much smaller place. And as the university grew, the area around it grew, and Alachua, though it's still the county seat, is now a little small town in comparison. Now, UCF and USF, I'm a little less concerned about immediately turning because they are less so an affront to the local population. UCF in Orlando and USF in Tampa, which, by the way, those names never really made a whole lot of sense to me because USF is barely south of UCF. It's more, it's way west of UCF because it's on the other side of the state. But USF being in Tampa kind of never really made sense to me. I mean, because you would think the University of South Florida would be in South Florida, not in Tampa. There's definitions of South Florida can vary. Some people like to include the West Coast in the term South Florida, so you might say, Naples, Fort Myers, that's South Florida, an expanded definition of it. More accurately, you'd call it Southwest Florida. South Florida's kind of always been Dade, Broward, Palm Beach. But this is a tangent. It doesn't matter. None of you really care. This doesn't affect anything. But anyway, UCF, USF, they're in, fairly lefty cities to begin with. Obviously, not everyone in Tampa is like, so Tampa is no Portland. Orlando is no Berkeley. I mean, I believe that Jair Bolsonaro, the far-right president of Brazil, is currently living in exile in Orlando. So, what we consider to be a left-wing city here in Florida would not be considered so in other states. So, obviously, none of this is going to be completed, as I've said before, in just 4 years. It's too bad that DeSantis didn't start this after his initial election, but, again, maybe like me, he didn't really think it was possible. But, when you win nearly 60% of the vote in what is traditionally considered a swing state, I can see how that would make someone more ambitious. So I'm not going to blame him, for not doing something that I didn't even think was possible, earlier than he's doing it now. I'm just glad that it's going on, and I think that things are progressing quickly, but still, over the course of 4 years, it's going to be very tough to change the culture of not just New College, but all of the major universities here. We really need someone who is as dedicated to the fight. Like, you can't, absolutely, it's imperative that you don't have someone who's just like a seat holder that replaces DeSantis. That would be a disaster, because all this progress would be, I think, reversed easily by a bureaucracy that is unencumbered by a strong will like DeSantis. And frankly, I'm not so sure about our bench here. Matt Gaetz is about the only one I would trust at this stage, but people don't really take him seriously as a statewide candidate. The same was kind of true, though, with DeSantis. In fact, back in 2018, Matt Gaetz was a major endorsement for DeSantis. Like, he was at a lot of, I remember him being at a lot of campaign stops because, back then, Gaetz still had a pretty high profile, and maybe even more so than DeSantis. And so DeSantis was still able to pull through. So unless we get another personality like that to go on into the future, until this is really entrenched, the leftist Leviathan is always going to come right back, because it's just like the federal bureaucracy. They are completely entrenched, You have to clean house over a number of years. You have to abolish these departments that are dedicated to the destruction of our society. And so this is a decade-plus project. But I think that we could see real progress, and that progress would go a long way. I mean, to me, it would just be a dream to think that you could change the culture at one of these universities enough to where, especially UF, because that school so dominates the local area, and it is in such contrast to the values of the people who live around there. It would be great to see that area change enough for the local government to change hands. I mean, even think about it, if the local school board in Alachua County changed hands, what a difference that would make. Because currently, because UF is such a left-wing juggernaut, you have a very rural county that is controlled explicitly by the left, and whose education is entirely left-wing, and they don't really have the option of running, good school board candidates. And I'm saying this off the top of my head. I don't know anything about the Alachua County School Board, but I'm just saying based off the voting trends there, it's like a 60 to 66% blue county. You're not getting any reasonable people on the school board. And so if you're able to de-wokeify the university, then you change the culture of the city. Then the county government, the city government, will eventually be de-wokeified by the unwoke voters. I mean, this is the left's plan of cultural transformation and cultural rot in reverse. This is not conservative. Let's put it that way. Because conservatives don't create culture. Conservatives just they cling to whatever they have, and they say, at least don't take this away from me. At least, don't make me engage in gay sex. Don't make me be attracted to trannies. But they always take everything that the left has won in the past for granted. They always let that slide. They never try and turn the tide in the other direction. They never question. Once the left has won a battle, well, that's settled science. That's settled law. The Supreme Court has spoken. One more thing I just thought of, and then I'll wrap things up. Florida State University in Tallahassee. As I said, it's right there next to the locus of power. It's right there at the executive branch. If you've got a woke left-wing school there, churning out woke graduates, who is staffing our government? Who's working at as staffers at the legislature? Who's working in the bureaucracy? Most likely, it's woke Florida State graduates. You de-wokeify Florida State, well, then all of a sudden, you're going to have much less woke influence over the legislature. You're going to have a lot less woke folks in the bureaucracy. Teachers, all public school teachers have to have a bachelor's degree, I believe. And that means that they have to go through these currently woke institutions and get some kind of a degree, either in whatever they're teaching or, God forbid, like a teaching major or education major, I think is what they call it. And, please specialize in something. But anyway, if not every university student who's not already explicitly right-wing didn't become left-wing as a result of their conditioning in the university system, well, then guess what? You have less woke teachers. And therefore you have lower suicide rates amongst young people, because you have less young people being told that up is down, and I'm kind of speechless trying to think of euphemisms for the tranny nonsense and everything else, and the white hatred and whatever else, and what's the new thing? You're not blessed. You're privileged. all of this nonsense came out of the universities starting in the 60s. And so if we start to recapture these institutions, that means that right now what we're witnessing is as bad as it gets. It means that things get better from here. If we start changing these institutions back the other way, that means that the highest level of saturation of wokesters exists today in the present. That means that we have hope for the future. Do you realize how significant that is? I think most of you do. If you're crazy enough to listen to this channel, you probably don't have a ton of hope. You know, Malice's new book is The White Pill. He's been talking about it for a long time, and I didn't know what it was going to be about. I mean, I knew that it was going to be about the white pill, but I didn't know, what the content was going to be like, and he decided to make it a history of the Soviet Union, and, the thesis is, hey, the white pill is that the Soviets lost. And you know what? These people can lose too, and they will lose eventually. Because evil can't create anything. They only know how to destroy. I said earlier that conservatives, don't create anything, and that's true too, but that doesn't mean that they're out actively trying to destroy things. They just let the destructive forces of society eat away at them ever so slowly. In fact, to borrow something else from Malice, it's conservatism is progressivism going the speed limit. And so the cure to progressivism is not conservatism as it's existed in this country over the past 75 years. The answer is a reawakening. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.